Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with our next section. Looks like we've got the same group with us from the previous session, so I won't recap or reintroduce the meeting. Our next section, as you can see on the screen, we've got Jennifer Stradtman joining us from USTR. And Jennifer is the director for technical barriers to trade within the United States Trade Representative. She's the lead for the World Trade Organization TBT committee and was lead negotiator for technical barriers to trade chapter of the United States, Mexico, and Canada Agreement, USMCA. So previously, she served 10 years in the Department of Commerce in various roles relating to standards, conformity assessment, and TBT, leading the United States in the APEX subcommittee on standards and conformity assessment from 2006 to 2011. She first started her career in Washington as a staff director with ACIL. It was about 20 years ago, right, Jennifer?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. Well, glad to have you back with us. I think I want to say it was about 4 or 5 years ago that you came in and we were able to do it in person last time. I know I heard you on the ACES call last year, so we're glad to have you back. Look forward to your feedback and your updates.
Sure. So maybe what I'll do is, since the first, I have the items that you'd like me to speak about. So the first one I see here is the Mexican quality law. So maybe we'll start with USMCA implementation and the Mexican quality law, because those things kind of go hand in hand. So we are now about 9 months into USMCA implementation, and the Mexicans have given us quite a ride in terms of having a lot of measures that we are following that are concerning and are restrictive. This is particularly in the agriculture space, but we can see that also they're setting very strict standards and conformity assessment requirements in areas like telecom, broadcasting equipment. There's a new measure coming out on automobiles. We are covering everything that we can. We have about 9 measures that we're following right now related to TBT. With respect to the national quality law, that was passed last year around this time, and what we're waiting for is the implementation requirements, which we understand will come out around the end of April. It could be actually any day. We've been promised, DGN has promised us that they will send us a copy of the measure. And of course, hopefully it will be notified to the TBT committee in the WTO, since it's in Mexico's implementing requirements. This is an important law for us to review. It is going to have very specific requirements for accreditation bodies, conformity assessment bodies. So we will pay a lot of attention to it. We understand it will be a very long implementation regulation, about 100 pages, similarly to how the law was structured. So until that comes out, we don't really know what it's going to say, but I can promise you that we will have it translated. We will have it translated, and we will also have a very thorough review of it. What does this mean for third-party laboratories, certification bodies? Hopefully, it does mean for you that there could be opportunities for testing to the Mexican requirements, or if it's a certification body is required, that those members that are certification bodies would also be able to take advantage of the business that would transpire from manufacturers. USMCA has very specific requirements to recognize or provide national treatment for conformity assessment bodies and also accreditation bodies. So we'll see if Mexico really complies with that. There hasn't been too much out of Canada. The thing that we're following mostly there is a ban on plastics right now. That's the big thing that we're following there. And then, in terms of like what's coming up next, it's envisioned that before July 1st, there will be a Free Trade Commission meeting of the USMCA. We've already had our TBT committee chapter meeting back in fall of last year, our first one. So we might have another chapter meeting around the time of whenever the Free Trade Commission meeting is set, depending on what the priority issues are. So that is what is happening with USMCA and the National Quality Law. So I think that's the main update there.
Jennifer, is there anything specific that you've absorbed yet that would affect or change recognition of, I think for most of the folks on the call right now, it's recognition of their test results or test evaluations that might be rolled into some product approvals?
Right now, we're only seeing very strict requirements for the manufacturers. For the most part, we've seen an increase in the requirement for testing from a third-party laboratory, plus use of a certification body that has been accredited. And the laboratory has to be accredited too. So I think we'll see an increase in third-party certification schemes out of Mexico. They don't seem to be embracing suppliers' declaration of conformity. And so there will be more opportunities for business. Now, I think it's going to vary regulator by regulator. So for right now, we are closely looking at anything that comes through from IFT, for example, which is the telecom regulator. We have provided comments on, some of the measures we see coming out on broadcasting equipment, and also standards for like specific absorption rates. I know George Tannehill just provided us a bunch of technical comments on the SIR standard. So it really, it will be regulator by regulator, but so far we have not seen any national treatment issues for conformity assessment.
So it seem likely that accreditation bodies, certification bodies, and test labs in the United States, their results will be accepted in Mexico, or is there any language in there that's steering us towards having to use Mexican or Mexico-based labs and CBs and ABs?
So in terms of the USMCA and what language is in there, in the agreement, there is specific language that requires Mexico and Canada and the United States to accept each other's conformity assessment bodies and accreditation bodies on a national treatment basis, as long as they are using the ISO IEC CAS P2 standards and they are accredited to those standards accordingly by accreditation bodies. There shouldn't be a problem.
Awesome. Thanks.
But of course, we have to watch everything nonetheless, because we never know if something is going to come up that would be contrary. And that's what we're looking for right now, anything that would be contrary to the agreement. So certainly if any of your members see anything that they would think would be contrary or give them a disadvantage, they need to definitely bring that to my attention.
Yeah, I know when I last heard from you last spring, it seemed like it was kind of a little bit of a quick dash to translate and absorb the new quality regulation and make sure there wasn't anything that was going to conflict with what we all assumed was kind of pretty safe within the USMCA.
It really was a dash to figure that out, because it was such a complicated law. And it had so many different tiers to it and so much repetition. So it was something, in terms of like even the translation. I was, talking to consultants that you're probably familiar with, like Ileana Martinez, who now works for the TIC Council. She would say, this isn't the right translation, it's this, not this. And we'd go through the whole thing. And, she'd be helping me. So even with our English translation, there were still technical differences or our translators weren't technically oriented, so some words were different. So it was a challenge, but we did comment on that measure, and we do intend to comment on the measure that comes out on implementation as well.
We appreciate the efforts of you and your colleagues to stay on top of that.
Yes. So then the next topic you wanted me to cover was the WTO Triennial Review. Are you ready for that one, or are there any questions from any of the members?
I'm not hearing any. I gave it the obligatory 10-15 second pause. So.
Okay, and I see Ramona and George are also on the line here. So, you know, with respect to those Mexican measures that we discussed for telecom, they are the ones who are really helping me and the team, Ashley Miller, develop the technical comments for the United States into those different measures. So please reach out to them as well if you see anything that you want to discuss. So then on to the WTO. So right now we're engaged in the 9th triennial review of the WTO TPT agreement. The agreement is over 25 years old. So if you can imagine from a conformity assessment point of view, a lot has changed in the world regarding conformity assessment from 25 years ago. Even, you know, going back to when the agreement was first signed, there were barely guides for accreditation. And most of the standards in CASCO were guides, and now they're all standards and sophisticated standards at that. And there has been just a huge boom in the conformity assessment business all over the world. And the members of the WTO are definitely growing their conformity assessment base, whether they have to grow it by having national authorities for things like accreditation, or they have kind of state-sponsored certification programs. There's definitely been an increase over that period of time in the conformity assessment business for every country in the world. And so, you know, we are kind of contemplating how we try to handle that within the context of the review. In the 8th review, so basically the agreement is static. It's not going to change, but this triennial review basically gives members opportunities to enhance the implementation and operation of the agreement. And so that usually means a lot of voluntary recommendations or decisions that the committee members put forward. And we do this by having proposals that we issue every 3rd year. And then those proposals by the end of the year are put into a work plan. And then the work plan is worked on by the committee to its fullest extent for the next 2 years. And then the cycle repeats. So where we are in that cycle is that proposals are due the 28th of May to the committee for consideration in the 9th review. Now there will be a carryover item from the 8th review, because we have committed to do a guideline on conformity assessment. And so far, the only thing that's happened on that guideline is that there have been 6 members to present papers with respect to what a guideline could look like, or national practices that members would like to see included in the guideline. So the members that have responded on the conformity assessment guideline are the United States, the EU, Japan, Canada, China, and Australia. And there is already a signaling from the members that this review and this project will likely continue into the 9th review. We think it's an important project, but as a developed country member in the WTO, we'd like to see a lot more countries come forward with ideas and papers about their national practice before we start developing a guideline. We would not think it would be appropriate to develop a guideline off the practices of 6 members when you have over 160 members. We need some input, and particularly developing country input. Otherwise, we feel like it would not be embraced if we just went ahead and developed a guideline on our own. But the idea is that there would be a guideline and that it's something that's a long-term project for the committee. So the work is ongoing on that front. And I've been working with Warren Merkel and Renee Hansher on that. They've been leading that activity with us, and we would continue to work together in the course of the 9th review on that project. We're also talking about new ideas, and one of the new ideas there has been a new idea submitted to us by ANSI on accreditation policy. And it relates back to the cross-frontier policy that's being considered in ILAC and IF. I know that those organizations are merging in the next couple of years. But the concern is that there are competition issues within the context of that new policy that would be unfavorable to U.S. accreditation bodies. And so we're contemplating that as the U.S. government right now, how we're going to take that on in the context of the review. So no news on that yet. We don't have a clear path forward, but we're working on taking the ideas provided by ANSI and seeing what we can use as a U.S. government position into the committee on that topic. You might know.
I was going to say, are the accreditation bodies working directly with you on that? We have a couple members, even though they're not on the call at present.
The accreditation bodies are working through ANSI on the paper because they don't have an association of accreditation bodies. I think they decided to work through ANSI, which helps us and helps, it's a good situation for everybody to be working through ANSI on that topic.
Okay, thank you.
So that's one idea that might be new that we're carrying through in the 9th review. And otherwise, right now we're working on the other things that we're working on. A lot of the issues relate to transparency. There are a ton of new e-tools that the committee is beginning to use, and we have to determine as a country like how we're going to use them, what the best course of action is with respect to like how we communicate that to our stakeholders. But basically, the WTO is updating all of its functionality this year, which is exciting. But when you have over 3,000 TBT notifications annually, we want to be clear in our communication about those tools. So right now, we're still using the NIST Notify US to receive notifications from the WTO and to put those out to our stakeholders. I know NIST has over 3,000 users still. But there is a new tool that other countries use called ePing. And so there's a lot of concentration in the review about how ePing will be used by members and whether we'll be able to have things like better communication when a country is concerned about a particular measure, how we communicate that to other members so that there's awareness. And then also, it's a little terrible, but like when we complain about an issue on the floor of the WTO, how we can kind of gang up on the offending member. That's something that's being discussed. How do we use those tools better so that we know early on that we all have a problem, that we can all kind of complain together. The other thing that we're working on is some sectoral type proposals. There may be one on cybersecurity. There may be one on medical devices. We're still working through those with the proponents, but we would like to see some sectoral activity in the context of the review, because without it, the topics of the committee are kind of bland because they usually relate to standards, conformity assessment, sometimes metrology, and they're great discussions, but sometimes it just can be a little more exciting when there's a sector related to it and there's sectoral interest related back to those topics. So the sector-specific proposals are something we're also working on. We may have one on like halal certification, which I don't know how much you guys are interested in that, but that's a growing trend in our committee. And so we're looking for areas that are kind of new or evolving where we could really use some further education on, what's going on around the complaints that might be occurring in the committee. So that's kind of what's happening on the triennial review. And then once proposals are in that first week of June, we have our second committee meeting of the year where we do most of our complaining, but then there's a whole day to talk about these proposals. And then in the summer, the Secretariat will merge those proposals into one document, and we'll begin negotiating on them in September through November. And then that will conclude the review, and we'll have a review document to work on for the next 2 years.
Interesting. So is there a specific proposal for medical devices? I heard that mentioned.
We have not put any proposals in yet because we just got our USTR and our political team just came in. So we did want to run our ideas through our new political team before we make any proposals. So ours will come probably right around that May 28th deadline. We'll probably be submitting our proposals, but I can say that AdvaMed has come forward with an idea to the United States government. We've talked about it with them and also with FDA, and there's general support for us to have continuing dialogue on medical devices in the context of the committee. So I think we will be able to go forward with some proposal. Most of it relates to transparency and trying to have better identification in medical device regulations. Sometimes medical device regulations can be hidden in measures that are notified as health laws or sometimes pharmaceutical laws, and it's not immediately clear that they're medical device regulations. And also the other big thing that AdvaMed's looking for is greater implementation of our agreements with regulators in other countries. So sometimes they encounter regulators that don't know the first thing about the TBT agreement, and how do we show as an example the United States as a way for us, to demonstrate like how we use Circular A-119 or the National Technology and Transfer and Advancement Act. How do we use those tools to inform our regulators, and how do they select voluntary consensus standards? How do they develop their conformity assessment programs in an open and transparent manner that is consistent with the agreement? And so the idea is that other countries need some lessons there, and discussing this in the committee could be a way to improve those conditions in other countries.
Great.
Okay. I'm just going back to the list, which is on the other computer. In terms of like the new administration, I can't say too much about that. What I can say is that we have just had our ambassador appointed, Catherine Tai. She is the first Asian American woman to be USTR. And just to say that we are excited to have her, I think as staff, because she's somebody who worked at USTR before she worked on the Hill. She worked at USTR, so she does have a very good understanding of our organization, and we are just excited for her to be there and to get started, get our work started with her. I don't know that there's going to be any new negotiations announced in the immediate future, because my understanding is that the trade agenda talks about us recovering from COVID. This has been significant for the United States, in terms of like how we've been operating. We have had a lot of efforts focused on COVID relief, and like in the WTO and a lot of our APEC work, a lot of it's been focused on how do we facilitate trade in those goods like personal protective equipment, medical devices, vaccines. Those types of things seem to be the priority right now. And then, just so, everyone's aware, most of us are still also operating in a virtual format. We've now done 3 TBT committees and all our USMCA committees just like this over a virtual platform. The TBT committees are really interesting because you have 200 people participating in a virtual format, and at all times of the day and night. So we've literally seen everybody in our living rooms at every hour of the day, kind of working and doing our business as we would as committee members. So that's kind of been interesting. I would just say, and in terms of like, working on any market access issues that you may have as laboratories. I mean, just to remind you that Mike Violette and Ann Weeks are representatives on the ITAC on technical barriers to trade and standards. That is the United States official policy committee where we receive official guidance from the private sector. We receive guidance from a lot of different places. ACIL can always write me a letter if they have a policy concern or if they have an issue that's bothering you, or you can approach us as individual laboratories or companies. But Mike and Ann serve on the committee, as do Joe Batia. I know he has some overall interest that ACIL probably participates in ANSI to some degree. And then Pete Unger and Trace McInturf participate as accreditation experts. So we do have a very good team there that's participating, reviewing. They have the opportunity to actually review text proposals on any trade negotiation proposal from the United States. And their input is very important to us. We take their input very seriously. So, being able to work with them in that context is very important when we do have a trade negotiation. I also do put every single policy position through that we have in the WTO and USMCA and APEC. We have a variety of ways of communicating with them about just about every position we're going to take before we take it. So that's a great way to kind of keep informed, and we're always looking for members in that committee, especially experts from the conformity assessment community. So if there's anyone in the ACIL that's interested in being a member, please let me know, because I know that is something that we're trying to always have new members being considered.
Could you mention that committee again, just so we get the full plug in case anybody missed it?
Sure. It's the ITAC 14, the Industry Trade Advisory Committee on Standards and Technical Barriers to Trade. It includes conformity assessment.
Thank you. And Mike must have known that you were going to name drop him because he just joined the call a few minutes ahead of that.
He's been carrying the torch for a long time now. It would be great. He'd love to have a friend probably, because the meetings are long, and I know that everyone has to travel in for them when we have them. And so, Mike, I don't know how you feel about it, but there could always probably be one more conformity assessment expert on the ITAC.
I hope to engage more. It gets important work done.
So, otherwise, I mean, if anyone does encounter any kind of market access issue, or you feel like there's a compliance violation to a trade agreement, you really just need to contact, any of the government people that have been on the phone call today. Certainly, we all know how to write up a compliance concern. And we can talk with you and work with you about how we would bring that up with another government if you have one. We do that bilaterally. We do it in the WTO, but the WTO is kind of a last resort if we'd like to be able to solve things at low levels if possible. And sometimes we're able to even solve problems just by providing a comment. So we have a wide variety of mechanisms to address concerns in other countries if you have them, and always happy to work with you on those types of things. Are there any members experiencing any issues now with respect to trade barriers they see for themselves?
Nobody. Go ahead, Mike.
It's always tricky, and I think one of the things that we face at ACB and Washington Labs are the more complex radio frequency devices, and trying to get decent interpretations of how to go forward. So Jennifer, I don't know if it's a broader concern, but it just might be part of the challenge of working in a technical market. So these things are getting so complex, it's crazy.
Yes, I have read some of your measures, and I see how it can be so complicated so quickly. The thing is, if you run into anything and you want to talk about something, I mean, I know Ramona has some expertise in that area, and I know some folks at NIST more broadly do. And then we also work with NTIA, and we work with, Department of Commerce in that space. So we put a team together and review everything and see if there's any violation. And we do that for every sector. And I know sometimes some of those kinds of comments might come through TIA or ITI. We work with them on a regular basis as well.
Jennifer, I've got more of a general question about how USTR might work with different sectors sometimes if there's competing advantages within the US. For example, manufacturers may love a conformity assessment program based on self-declaration of conformity, whereas accreditation bodies, certification bodies, some stakeholders may not want that. When there's, maybe within the country, a concern from one side or the other, one faction or the other within the supply chain, how does USTR typically engage to work through those issues?
Well, Dan, I think you would think that comes up a lot where we have a conflict, but there's not usually a conflict, mostly because I think the sectoral practices are fairly well defined, and the manufacturers who are used to third-party certification don't necessarily complain about third-party certification in another country. It's normally when there's been a supplier's declaration and it moves to third-party certification without justification is when we're, and there's always been supplier's declaration, is when we would kind of get involved. If there were some terrible conflict, we would have to work through the interagency process and through the ITAC to resolve it. But we haven't had anything. I mean, you'll see UL sees everything because they're, and Mike, they see everything that comes through because they're on the ITAC, and I've not seen them flag up anytime recently about anything that we've been advocating for, in terms of conflicting with the manufacturers.
Great. Any other questions or comments for Jennifer? No. Anything else on the horizon, Jennifer, that is worth mentioning?
No, I don't have anything right now. Again, just because our political team just got in, and you could see in the press that Catherine Ambassador Tai has been meeting with all of her counterparts over the last week, all the major trading partners you'd expect, the EU, Germany, Korea, Japan, the new head of the WTO. I mean, she's had a busy schedule for her first few days, so we'll find out how everything goes after she has these initial round of meetings, and then if there's anything significant, I'm sure we'll be in touch, and especially if there's anything related to conformity assessment, I would try to keep you guys informed and posted.
Appreciate it. We'll check in with you later in the year, maybe see how things have shaken out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Jennifer. Appreciate your input always, and we're glad to have your participation this year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.